Hey, what's going on, guys? Dylan here. Just wanted to let you know that we have a very special sponsor on the channel now. Yes, the good folks over at AKR Projectors have partnered with us to talk about some of their upcoming and current products. More specifically, what I have for you guys today is the portable mini projector. Yes, this thing, I gotta admit, I was a little skeptical when they first sent it over. I was a little bit like, been seeing these all over TikTok, been seeing them all over YouTube, but I gotta say, after hooking this thing up and actually playing with it for a couple of weeks, I don't know what I would do without it. We're always just chasing and trying to get that theatrical experience at home. Well, I'm here to tell you the best way that you can do that is by getting into the projector game. And for those of you who've never owned a projector, who are just trying to get your feet wet, I gotta say, this thing is the best place to start. Not only is it super portable, super sleek, but it also is very easy to set up. I had this thing ready to go with apps downloaded in about 5 minutes, and that's my all-time favorite piece to this, guys, is the fact that this thing has its own operating system in it. So yes, you can access the Google Play Store and get all of your favorite streaming apps. We got Shudder, we got Screenbox, we got everything under the sun at our disposal for this projector. And don't worry, if you're a quality nut like myself, this baby does come with the hookups and the ability to project in 4K using any of your favorite devices, everything from your favorite game console to your most prestigious Blu-ray 4K players. So yeah, this thing, you kind of can't lose with it. I really found myself going head over heels in love with it, and I really think if you're looking to spice up your movie watching experience at home, this bad boy is a great place to start. Definitely use our affiliate link down below. Check out AKR Projectors TikTok shop. They've got a lot of great products on there as well, multiple different projectors, but if you're just looking to get in on the ground floor, this is definitely the best one to start with. And our link will go directly to it. You'll get it in just a few days, and I promise you, you will not regret it. This thing is super fun. It makes my life super easy. And yeah, honestly, just having a projection of the films you're wanting to watch and what we're talking about up on my ceiling, my wall, or even the projector screen my wife and I just invested in, it's changing the game for us here. So definitely thank you again to AKR, and we hope that you guys will take a look at this and pick one up for yourself.
Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters. Welcome back to the channel with another list. Yes, 5 unforgettably brutal Australian movies. And my last list, I had a chance to cover some serial killer films. Road Games did make that list, and I hadn't revisited that one after a little bit of time. I don't think I'd revisited it in probably over a year. And I forgot how great that film is and just how rewatchable it is. And from that story aspect, it brings something unique that I think we don't see in a lot of American films. And then it had me thinking about a film that came out last year. May have went under the radar for some. It's You'll Never Find Me, and that's another Australian film that is really confined in its storytelling, but really well done in the narrative that it presents. Just the dialogue is rather intriguing, but also just as a horror story, it does provide something that really is just bone-chilling. So I got inspired to really dust off some Australian films that I hadn't revisited but had certainly stuck with me throughout the years in terms of those horror elements and just all around disturbing nature. So I was able to compile a list, so let's hop into it. Taking the number 5 spot, Killing Ground. A couple's camping trip turns into a frightening ordeal when they stumble across the scene of a horrific crime. This film is a pretty simple story, and it does fall under that kind of survival horror subgenre. And if it's your first time watching the film, I do want to mention that this is a bit of a slower burn with the story that's being told. But Damien Power lays such a great foundation for this film with his crafty editing and only letting the audience know just enough of the narrative to keep us intrigued and just to keep us watching to see what was going to happen. This being that slower burn kind of film, I'll say it takes probably about 45 minutes for this film to really get going into what makes this film classified as brutal, but once that actually does happen, it really does make your heart race for all the characters on screen. For most of the film, we're primarily with a couple, Ian, played by Ian Meadows, and Sam, played by Harriet Dyer, who sells the terror in this film beyond belief. Sometimes when we're dealing with this kind of trope of a woman running through the woods being terrified, it can kind of feel a little hollow just because we've seen it so much, and it is the foundation for a lot of horror films, especially a lot of classic horror films. But Dyer really does amp up her performance here, and then with Damien Power's approach with those intimate shots and just the crafty editing, it really does add a lot of tension to the scene. While this film takes place primarily in the woods, it never really feels redundant or that we're retreading anything. Damien Power really does find different ways to approach scenes with a unique manner and really construct that tension in a different way. There's a scene in here with our main villains, and we build some tension with a beer can. They're shooting it off another character's head. And I will say that one really does hit you because of how long we do sit in the scenes, and I do love that about this film. We sit in some of the scenes a little bit longer than probably we should, but it is a way where it doesn't feel like it's moving too slow. We really are building that tension. And then by the time we get to that brutal scenery, it makes it that much more worth it. There's a heartbreaking interaction between Sam and one of our villains, Shook, that might be hard for some audiences to watch. I will say it's done rather abruptly, and it's going to be one of those things where you're asking yourself, did I just see what I actually saw? But it will sit with you, so I just want you to be aware of some of the scenes are a little bit jarring, and they do go into some territory that might be a little bit harder to watch sometimes. One beautifully terrorizing scene that Damien Power did give us in this film is with our character Sam as she's walking to the car from a campsite. We do see a character from another interaction in the background, in the very background, as they're walking toward her, trying to catch up to her, but they keep falling down until eventually, as Sam makes her way to the car, we just don't see that character in the background anymore. It is absolutely terrifying, but I love the way that it's shot, and there are a lot of scenes like that in here that the scenery's gorgeous, and you're kind of juxtaposing it with a lot of the terror that is in the woods. There are just so many fantastic moments of tension in this film that's going to keep you engaged. Now, this one does pop up on Netflix from time to time. It is where I caught it. I did check. It's not there right now, but I keep an eye out for this one because you have to add it to your watch list. Capturing the number 4 spot, Hounds of Love. Vicky Maloney is randomly abducted from a suburban street by a disturbed couple. As she observes the dynamic between her captors, she quickly realizes she must drive a wedge between them if she is to survive. This is a downright gritty film that deals with a lot of physical and psychological torture. Now, this one did actually pop up on my radar when we interviewed Scott Chambers, who just recently directed Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmares, as a recommendation to kind of say this was an inspiration with the dynamic of his film and maybe one to watch in order to prep yourself for seeing Neverland Nightmares, which, I had never expected for Hounds of Love to pop up in that conversation, and I hadn't seen it. So I did seek this one out. I was able to acquire the Blu-ray. I did check to see if this one is streaming anywhere. Unfortunately, it is not right now. I don't even know if you can purchase this on VOD, but I did end up picking up the Blu-ray, and I am so glad that I did. Now, this does take place in the 80s, so it is kind of a period piece with that throwback aesthetic, but they balance it perfectly where it never feels hyper 80s or that they're using it as a gimmick. The actual time period does complement the story itself. As the film opens up, we're already introduced to our couple, John and Evelyn, as they're sitting in a car. They're watching some high school girls play some sports, and you can already tell something is off as they are kind of casing the scenery. One of the girls is walking home after school, and they end up picking her up, and she reluctantly gets into the car, and we already know that nothing positive is going to be coming from this, but it really does kind of give us that dynamic of what we're going to be in for as we get deeper into the narrative. What I liked about this one in terms of how disturbing it is they kind of keep it up to your imagination as to what's going on. They do a couple of quick cuts in terms of the aftermath of what has exactly happened with our character that they had picked up. And it just adds to that brutality of not actually seeing, but just being able to piece that together with your mind. And that does play a big role in Hounds of Love. Director Ben Young did a wonderful job of kind of constructing this story, understanding the life of Vicky, understanding the life of John and Evelyn and what kind of characters they are, and really building that tension before these characters ever meet. So when they finally do, and Vicky gets in their car, your heart sinks to your ass because you already know what is in store for her, and you just want her to get out of that car. I really like Young's approach here, where sometimes the subject matter that we are dealing with in Hounds of Love can be a little gratuitous or maybe treated a little too graphically, whereas he has a really distinct approach where he leaves more so to the imagination, and rather than showing it or living in those scenes for too long, he really just lets you connect those dots. Rather than showing scenes of SA, there are moments leading up to those scenes that have an implication of what has happened rather than sitting in those scenes just to deem it disturbing. There are scenes in here where we have the couple of John and Evelyn going into the room where Vicky is held captive, and you can kind of see her reaction as they're entering the room, and she's tied up, and we already know what is going to be taking place, but rather than actually showing it, they just kind of close the door, and we linger on the door for a few seconds, and then we kind of move on to the next scene. So your brain is kind of piecing together what just happened in that previous scene, and now we're on into the next instance, which I felt like that stuff did sit with me a little bit longer, just because you're connecting those dots as you're living in another scene. So it really just kind of adds to the tension here, and I really did like that approach. It's not something that we see often, and when we do, it's not as well done, I think, as Hounds of Love, but this one I think has a lot of positives. Again, it does touch on some subject matter that may be a little bit disturbing for some people, but it's handled in such a different way that I can easily recommend this one. Snagging the number 3 spot, Beaten to Death. A desperate choice leads Jack down a path that leaves him beaten and bruised as he struggles against man, nature, and his own insanity. When we talk about brutal films, director Sam Curtin had to have the term brutality in his head when he constructed Beaten to Death. The opening scene for this film is basically just our main character getting his ass kicked for an awkwardly long time, and I absolutely love it. Even though we're served that carnage candy very early on in this film, it doesn't lighten up from there. This film really does feel like an exercise to determine how long an audience can sit there and watch a dude get his ass handed to him over and over again from one scene to the next. Thomas Roach plays Jack, our lead, and he shows a perfect range of emotional depth throughout this film. He goes through a marathon of punishment and sells it so well to the audience. He's dealing with so many different things here, from opposing forces, from man versus man, and then we also have those elements that he's going to be basically stuck in. You have some beautiful scenery, but you know what this character is going through, and you just feel awful for him. The cast here is very minimal, so we do spend a lot of time with our main character Jack as he battles this set of obstacles. And, that can be quite an undertaking for an actor as well as an audience. It kind of can feel a little redundant. It can feel really lacking in terms of story. But the way Thomas Roach does portray this character and what he's actually going through really makes you engaged as an audience. You just feel really bad for him, and you can't help but put yourself into his shoes and understand what he's going through. And it kind of just resets you to feel completely awful for him all over again. I don't want to spoil too much if you're unfamiliar with this film, and the trailer shows hints toward it but doesn't 100% give it away, so I don't want to mention this huge loss that our character does go through. And it's something that plays such a major role in this film. It's completely intense when that scene does come about. When we're looking at certain films, you're always thinking, how is this character going to get out of this situation? And I feel myself looking at that with Beaten to Death a lot. Even though I've seen this a handful of times, I always wonder how this character is going to get out of this particular scene. And we know he's not. And it still feels like maybe that there is a chance. And I think, that really does add to the tension and brutality of what we do see. And then as we make our way through the scene and we realize there is no help coming from Jack, I love what the director had done here in his approach. We do a POV shot from Jack's perspective there as he's going through this loss, and I think it really does add to it. Now, some of the CGI doesn't really work here, but I think overall the element that they're trying to capture and convey to the audience really does work from that brutality aspect. Opposing our character Jack here is Ned, who's played by David Tracy, and when it comes to unknown actors, this guy is at the top of my list for sure. I'm really excited to see what he's going to do next, because he plays this character of Ned to a T. Immediately when we meet him, he isn't this warm, welcoming character, and that only amps up to 100 as we get through the rest of the film. There's this kind of cat and mouse game that we see in this film that's so altered because of what Jack has gone through that I find myself continuously just feeling awful for him. And when we're going through these scenes that, when a character is 100% fine, we're not really looking at that to say, this is disturbing. But when you keep putting yourself into Jack's shoes, it really just amps up that brutality that we're seeing and are wondering, is this character going to survive by the end of this film? Beaten to Death is probably the most accessible film on this list. It is streaming on Shudder, so definitely check this one out if you're looking for that kind of dark and gritty film, but you're probably going to want to take a shower afterward. Serving us up in that number 2 spot, The Loved Ones. When Brent turns down his classmate Lola's invitation to the prom, she concocts a wildly violent plan for revenge. The vibe for this film is like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre meets Pretty in Pink, and I have no idea how director Sean Byrne was able to mesh that together, but this absolutely works. This film has such a distinct taste to its aesthetic performances and overall story. You're overcome by the amount of tension this film can build and then amp it up with that gore and brutality. When I had first stumbled upon this film, I had no idea what I was in store for, and I wasn't prepped for the pacing and how quick the narrative moves. We're really only with our main character Brent for about 15 minutes before we get into a lot of that carnage candy that we're going to see for the duration of the film. The cast here puts on perfect anxiety-inducing performances that really levels up how disturbing some of the scenes play out. The father-daughter relationship between Lola and her dad is really downright unsettling, which drives home how batshit insane these characters really are. When I had first watched this film, I was expecting that kind of typical dynamic that we're going to get some sort of friction between Lola and her father as we get through some of these events with Brent, but as we're introduced to everything and understanding the character's motivations, we figure out that Lola is really all in with everything that's going on, and that really makes you feel hopeless for Brent. Xavier Samuel plays Brent, our lead character, and like I said, we're only with him for a short time out of the situation with Lola and her father, but the time we're with him really makes you connect with his character and what he's going on. His character really is grieving at that point and dealing with a particular loss that he hasn't gotten over yet. So we've already connected in some fashion with the Brent character before he even gets into this situation. But once we find him in the situation and how that all ties back to the beginning really does make you connect with that character even more. And then with the performance from Xavier Samuel, he really is able to convey that emotional and physical pain that really does amp up the terror in The Loved Ones. When I first watched this film, I wasn't really expecting any sort of expansion into the narrative at all. I thought we were really just going to be dealing with this one instance, but when we start getting more of a backstory of Lola and her father and exactly how long they've been doing this, it really does amp it up to an entirely different level of disturbing. When I first watched this film, I didn't really find it scary in any sense. It was more disturbing than anything else, but there's an element in here that we get farther down the line that is absolutely terrifying. It involves a cellar. I don't want to go too deep into it, but what exactly is in that cellar is just some horrific imagery, and I was not prepped, and it is honestly, upon rewatches for this film, it's one of my favorite aspects of the film because it really does lean into those horror aspects and not just solely on disturbing elements. This film delivers one gut punch after another, but it has such a distinct flavor that it's going to make you want to rewatch this one, which is pretty unusual with some disturbing films. A lot of them, for me, are just one and done, but this one I do find myself going back to not necessarily often, but at least once a year, just because I love the imagery and just the performances in general. This one is pretty accessible. You can probably pick this one up on VOD, probably on Google Play or Prime. It usually is available there, and sometimes this one is streaming, so I'd keep an eye out, because if you haven't checked out The Loved Ones, you're missing out. Coming in at the number 1 spot, receiving the gold medal of brutality, is the Snowtown Murders. Based on true events, 16-year-old Jamie falls in with his mother's new boyfriend and his crowd for self-appointed neighborhood watchmen, a relationship that leads to a spree of torture and murder. When we're talking about films with an overall somber tone and that reaches levels of brutality that is really hard for films to reach, director Justin Kurzel really did it with this film, The Snowtown Murders. He provides a marathon of emotions that just embed in our brain. I hadn't revisited this one in a very long time, and I did forget how well-rounded this story is and how just kind of hits you from all angles. Lucas Pittaway as Jamie puts on a wonderfully depressing performance that throughout the whole film just makes you feel worse and worse for his character. Jamie is living with his mother who has cancer, and her new boyfriend John kind of takes over as Jamie's father figure at one point. We get to see Jamie become influenced by John, and then have to watch as Jamie goes through this mental and physical abuse throughout the film. This film really does touch on those aspects of manipulation, and that is really one of the brutal aspects here that I don't think we get in some of the other films that are on this list. And that's what I mean by it's so well-rounded in what it's going to give to its audience, because it isn't just the physical aspect of the brutality that we're going to see. Jamie goes through a lot mentally as well that he's still wrestling with by the end of the film. I'd covered some found footage films on a list a few months ago, and in that list I had talked about how kind of the idea of found footage and how it kind of gives you this intimacy that we don't see with more cinematic ventures. But director Justin Kurzel gave this film such a style to it that it evokes this realism of that aspect of found footage, but also through a cinematic lens. You really feel like you're watching almost a documentary with how real this feels, and it's shot and even acted that it adds just a lot of brutality to Jamie's life. The acting from the cast as well presents this aspect of realism that makes you forget you're watching a film. It has these nuances to each performance that creates an atmosphere of depression and anxiety that really can affect your mood while you're watching this. And honestly, I had forgotten how much this affects you while you're watching it. I actually had to pause this one and take a little bit of a break, which is unusual for a lot of films, even of the disturbing nature, but this one has such a looming cloud over it of kind of, it affects you emotionally, makes you feel almost depressed as you're watching it, that it is one of those films that I think it's going to hit you on a different emotional level. Yes, there's some disturbing elements to it from a physical aspect that we'll touch on, but when we talk about this hitting you on an emotional level, I think this one hits a little bit different than the other four on the list. And then when you're going from mental brutality to the actual physical violence in the film, it doesn't lighten up with the gore-filled imagery that we see throughout the rest of the film. All the films on this list are so diverse in their imagery in terms of how they're going to produce that dread for an audience. And the SNOWTOWN Murders is no different. One of the aspects of imagery that always sits with me in this film is when our main character, Jamie, is cleaning up some dried blood from a bathtub. Seeing that blood cake the tub as Jamie scrubs it off is absolutely harrowing. And when you watch the film, you already know whose blood it is, which is a character that certainly you don't feel bad for, but Jamie is someone you just want to cry for because of what he's been put through, and the emotional connection he has with some of these characters that go through some physical as well as other mental brutality. The SNOWTOWN Murders is a film that is so well-rounded in an anthem of brutality that it hits you on each different level, and adding that sense of realism is just the cherry on top. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We went to the land down under and covered some Australian films that are certainly going to stick with you from its brutality and just its overall storytelling. You know, I think this one did cover a lot of different avenues from just how diverse a level of brutality and somberness you can get with storytelling. And I think a lot of these provide just a lot of different and unique stories that we don't see that often. I know some of these are going to be a little harder to find if you haven't seen any of these, but I would always recommend these, even if they're blind buys. Something like Hounds of Love, which might be a little harder to come across. If you ever have a chance to pick that one up and haven't seen it, I'm going to say definitely do if it comes across your way, just because what a unique film. And all these are just rather wild watches. A lot of rewatchability in some of these, and some of them are going to sit with you, and you're not going to want to rewatch them for a few years. But the storytelling overall is just so well done, and just a lot of uniqueness coming from this list. So I was really excited to revisit some of these, even though they were a little somber at times. But I think just overall, you don't get storytelling like this all the time, and the way they're able to implement that level of brutality in such a different way, I think is something that should be studied and, you know, taken note. So definitely any of these films on the list, if you haven't checked them out, please do. But if you've seen some of these and want to comment down below whether you liked them or maybe something else should have been on the list, let me know because I'm always looking to do part twos, anything like that. So definitely hit me up on the comments below. Let me know what you think, and definitely peruse the channel a little more. If you're not subscribed, please check us out. We have a lot of great stuff coming up on the channel, a lot of lists, a lot of reviews we try to hit you with. So keep it right here. Give us a like, a share if you think we earned it, and certainly a subscribe. But until next time, I'm Luke Janesco, and stay scared.
Do the hard shit, gonna do it live, cause Splattercast kick it every day they live. Splattercast, slash ass, 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 Splattercast, slash ass.